What if a simple garbage man was the only one who could save a billionaire's grandson from a life of misery? This is the story of Jerome Washington, a man society dismissed, but who rose against prejudice, greed, and corruption to change countless lives forever. Stay with us till the end, because what happens will shock you. The golden afternoon light fell across the vast lawn of the Whitman mansion in Beverly Hills, where silence usually reigned, except for the sound of distant fountains and trimmed hedges swaying in the breeze. That silence was broken by a gentle melody Jerome Washington hummed as he knelt beside young David's wheelchair, tapping rhythm with his calloused hands. For the first time in months, the boy's face brightened. His small arms swayed, not perfectly but with joy, and Jerome guided him patiently, showing him how rhythm could be felt even when legs could not move. In that fleeting moment, David's world expanded beyond pain and confinement, touching something close to freedom. But the fragile peace shattered when Dorothy Whitman's shrill voice pierced the air. "Get that man out of here immediately! How dare you touch my grandson?" she cried, her perfectly manicured finger stabbing the air. At 60, with wealth and power woven into every gesture, she looked at Jerome not as a man, but as an intruder beneath her notice. Jerome, still kneeling, raised his head calmly, meeting her icy glare with quiet dignity. He had faced that kind of venom since childhood, but he refused to let it rattle him. David's small voice tried to defend him. "Grandma, he was teaching me to dance." His fragile plea carried the weight of a child desperate to protect the one person who had lit a spark inside him. Dorothy's fury grew. "Let go of his hand. Never come near this property again." Her blue eyes gleamed with a cold authority sharpened over decades of boardroom battles. Jerome released David's hand gently, his touch lingering as if leaving behind courage. He knew her type too well, the posture, the sharpened tone, the weaponized privilege. Yet he stood with respect in his voice. "I understand perfectly, ma'am." David's hands reached out again, but Dorothy snapped, "Shut up, David! You don't understand these things!" She pressed the intercom and summoned security. Two large men in immaculate uniforms appeared, moving with the efficiency of private guards trained to protect the wealthy. "Escort this man off the property," Dorothy commanded. Jerome rose slowly, his hands still marked by the grime of a morning's work, and gave David a discreet wave. "See you later, champ. Keep practicing that song." David waved back, eyes shining with new vitality. That tiny exchange, unnoticed by many, only deepened Dorothy's irritation. How dare this man build a connection with her grandson? As Jerome stepped through the gates under guard, he cast one last glance at the mansion. From the second-floor window, Jonathan Whitman, David's father, watched silently. His face betrayed something: shame, hesitation, perhaps guilt. But he remained motionless. Jerome recognized that look. Men like Jonathan rarely defied matriarchs like Dorothy, not when vast inheritances rested on obedience. Dorothy's voice rang out again, dripping with threat. "If you ever show up here again, I'll call the police." Jerome simply nodded and walked back to his truck, but his eyes carried a resolve that promised this would not be the end. The next morning, Dorothy wasted no time tightening her grip. Her sharp tone crackled over the phone as she demanded answers. From Richard Morrison, supervisor of the city's waste management department. "Mr. Morrison, I want the man on the Beverly Hills route removed immediately. Yesterday, he trespassed and harassed my disabled grandson." Morrison, who had known Jerome for years as one of his most reliable employees, was stunned. "Ms. Whitman? Jerome Washington is one of our best. We've never had a single complaint." Dorothy cut him off coldly. "Well, now you do. If you don't act, I'll make sure the city reconsiders its contracts with your company." Her threat was unmistakable, backed by decades of political donations. Morrison sighed, knowing he had little choice. When Jerome arrived for his shift, Morrison pulled him aside, his face heavy with discomfort. He explained Dorothy's complaint, softening the blow as best he could. Look, I know you did nothing wrong, but this woman has power. I'm transferring you to the industrial district until things settle down. Jerome listened quietly, swallowing the familiar bitterness of injustice. I understand, sir. When do I start? Monday, Morrison replied with regret. Jerome nodded. He had lived too long under the weight of wealthy whims to be surprised. That weekend, Jerome could not shake thoughts of David. The boy's smile, his small hands swaying to music, haunted him. He imagined David waiting on the porch again, looking for a friend who would never return. Something in Jerome refused to let that bond end with Dorothy's command. Against his usual instincts, he sat at his old laptop and began researching the Whitman family. Hours of clicking through articles and records revealed a story hidden beneath glittering headlines. Jonathan Whitman, heir to the empire, had lost his wife in a car accident 2 years ago, the same tragedy that left David paraplegic. Since then, Dorothy had taken control, both of the family fortune and the boy's life. Old photographs of David before the accident showed a lively, athletic child, smiling at soccer games and performing school dances. Recent images told another story, a pale, withdrawn boy always shadowed by his grandmother's watchful presence. Jerome dug deeper and stumbled on the Bright Future Foundation, Dorothy's pride and a magnet for millions in charitable donations. Supposedly dedicated to disabled children, its financial records told a different tale. The numbers didn't add up. Millions entered, but little reached those in need. Most of it vanished into administrative costs and consulting firms with shady addresses. Jerome leaned back, staring at the glowing screen. His instincts as both therapist and survivor told him he had uncovered something poisonous. The same woman who silenced her grandson's joy might also be exploiting countless other children. He saved every file, every report. What began as a moment of kindness on a mansion lawn had now become a mission. Dorothy Whitman had underestimated him, and Jerome Washington was no longer just a garbage collector. He was a man quietly preparing to challenge an empire built on cruelty and lies. The call came on a quiet Tuesday morning as Jerome prepared for another long shift in the industrial district. His phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number, and for a moment, he considered ignoring it. But something in his gut told him to answer. On the other end was a calm, professional voice. Mr. Washington, this is Dr. Chun from the Rosewood Rehabilitation Center. I've been reviewing your past credentials as a physical therapist. One of our young patients needs a specialized approach. Would you be available for a consultation? Jerome froze. It had been years since anyone asked for his therapy work. The scars of betrayal from his ex-wife and the collapse of his career had left him buried in the world of garbage routes. But something inside him stirred again. He cleared his throat. Yes, doctor. I can be there this afternoon. When Jerome stepped into the polished halls of Rosewood, the smell of antiseptic and the quiet hum of medical machines filled the air. He felt like a stranger returning to a life he thought he had lost forever. Dr. Chun, a precise man with sharp eyes, softened. By kindness, greeted him warmly. Thank you for coming. The boy's case is difficult. Paralysis from a spinal injury, severe withdrawal, little response to traditional therapy. As he led Jerome into the therapy room, Jerome's heart stopped. Sitting in the wheelchair, by the window was David Whitman, his small frame bent forward, his hands nervously tugging at his shirt. The boy looked up, and in an instant, his eyes widened with recognition. Jerome! He shouted with a joy that cut through weeks of silence. Jerome knelt beside him, unable to keep the emotion from his face. Hey, champ! Didn't expect to see you here. David's grin returned, the same spark Jerome had seen on the mansion lawn. He leaned forward, his voice trembling with excitement. Can we dance again? For a moment, Jerome almost laughed through the ache in his chest. We can do better than that. We'll make this place your dance floor." Dr. Chun watched silently, astonished by the transformation. In weeks of treatment, he had never seen the boy this alive. He scribbled notes as Jerome began guiding David's arms in rhythm, using gentle music and storytelling to coax movement where stiffness had taken root. Irony hung in the air. Dorothy Whitman, in all her fury, had banished Jerome from her mansion, only to unknowingly place him in the very clinic where her grandson needed him most. She had no idea the therapist now working with David was the same man she had thrown out like trash. Over the next 3 weeks, Jerome devoted himself fully. Each day he arrived early, bringing music, exercises, and encouragement. He taught David how rhythm could travel through the body, how even a wheelchair could become part of the dance. Slowly, the boy's shoulders straightened, his arms grew steadier, and his laughter returned. Nurses whispered about the miraculous change, while Dr. Chun quietly admitted, "I don't know what you're doing, but it's working." Late one afternoon, after a particularly lively session, David opened up in a way he never had before. His voice trembled, but his words carried the weight of truth. "Grandma doesn't let me talk about Mom. She says remembering her makes me weak. She tells me I'll never dance again, that I should forget it." Jerome listened, his heart tightening. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your mother loved you, David. Love doesn't make you weak. And you can dance. Maybe not the way you once did, but in a way that's all your own." Tears welled in David's eyes, but for the first time they weren't born of despair. They were tears of hope. Dr. Chun, overhearing fragments of the conversation, exchanged a troubled look with Jerome later in the hallway. "Isolation, suppression of memory. This is more than strictness. It borders on neglect." Jerome nodded grimly. He had seen controlling guardians before, but Dorothy's grip seemed designed to suffocate the boy's spirit. It was no longer just about therapy. It was about saving David from a life imprisoned by fear. That night, unable to rest, Jerome returned to his laptop. The Bright Future Foundation's glossy website boasted smiling children and bold promises, but the financial records told a darker story. He traced payments to shell companies with empty addresses, consulting firms that existed only on paper. Millions in donations vanished into hidden accounts. The deeper he dug, the clearer the picture became. Bright Future was a pipeline of embezzlement, disguised as charity. Dorothy wasn't just smothering her grandson's hope. She was stealing from countless children whose futures depended on those funds. Jerome sat back in the dim light of his apartment, his mind racing. His days with David had awakened more than just an old skill. They had reawakened his sense of justice. The Whitmans thought they could bury him under status and power, but fate had given him a second chance, not just to heal one boy, but to expose a web of greed reaching far beyond a Beverly Hills mansion. For the first time in years, Jerome felt the fire of purpose burning inside him again, and he knew the fight had only just begun. The storm arrived on a bright morning, unannounced but inevitable. Dorothy Whitman swept into the Rosewood Rehabilitation Center like a general entering enemy territory, her heels striking the marble floor with the rhythm of a gavel. Staff members stiffened, aware of the power her donations wielded. She pushed, past nurses until she reached the therapy room, where laughter spilled through the doorway. Inside, David sat in his wheelchair, arms lifted in rhythm as Jerome guided him through a slow routine to gentle music. His smile radiated, his cheeks flushed with triumph. Dorothy froze for a heartbeat, stunned by the sight of her grandson alive. With joy, then her eyes narrowed. "You!" she spat, voice sharp enough to slice the air. Jerome turned, meeting her fury with calm composure. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitman." David clapped his hands. "Grandma, look! Jerome taught me how to move with the music. I can dance again." His excitement rang like a bell, but Dorothy refused to hear it. Her lips thinned into a line of disdain. "Get away from him! You're finished here!" She stepped closer. Ignoring David's protests, her gaze fixed on Jerome like a predator cornering prey. "Dr. Chun will be informed immediately. You are fired." David's small voice wavered, pleading. "Please don't, Grandma. He's helping me. I feel stronger." But Dorothy silenced him with a cold wave of her hand. Jerome, however, did not retreat. His voice, steady and measured, carried across the room. "With respect, Mrs. Whitman, I am not your servant. I am a licensed physical therapist with years of experience. What I've done here is more progress than your money ever bought." He held her gaze, unflinching. The room seemed to tighten around them, the music fading to silence. Dorothy's fury sparked into something deeper, fear disguised as rage. "Credentials or not, you have no right to be near my grandson. You're a fraud who slipped in under false pretenses." Her words echoed, but before Jerome could reply, Dr. Chun entered, alarmed by the raised voices. "Mrs. Whitman, I assure you, Mr. Washington has been authorized. His therapy has produced results beyond expectation." Dorothy snapped her head toward him. "You're as naive as he is. Call Jonathan. Now." Within the hour, Jonathan Whitman arrived, his expression tight with unease. He looked at his son first, saw the light in his eyes, then turned to his mother, whose fury simmered like a storm cloud. "What's going on here?" Dorothy wasted no time. "This man is manipulating David. He has to be removed immediately." But before Jonathan could answer, Jerome stepped forward, pulling a folder from his worn satchel. His calm tone cut through the chaos. "Before you make that decision, Mr. Whitman, there are things you should see." He spread the documents across the table, financial reports, public filings, traced transactions. Each page told the story of the Bright Future Foundation, its facade of charity concealing embezzlement and fraud. Dorothy's face blanched as she scanned the evidence. "Where did you get this?" she hissed. Jerome met her glare evenly. "Where anyone can. Public records don't lie, and neither do the families who never received the help your foundation promised." He paused, then added with deliberate weight, "The FBI has already been contacted. They're reviewing the files as we speak." Silence fell like a hammer. Jonathan stared at the papers, the numbers undeniable. For years he had ignored whispers, choosing comfort over confrontation, but now the truth was staring him in the face. David broke the stillness with a question so innocent it pierced the room. "Grandma, you said Bright Future helps kids like me. Did you lie?" His voice cracked, but his eyes remained locked on her, searching for honesty she could not give. The words hit harder than any evidence Jerome could present. Dorothy faltered, her perfect mask slipping, her empire of control trembling under. The weight of a child's truth. Jonathan's voice rose, steadier than ever before. "Enough, Mother." He looked at Jerome, then at his son. "David deserves honesty. He deserves freedom, and I won't let your lies shape his life any longer." Dorothy's eyes widened, shocked that her son, once so obedient, was defying her. "Jonathan, think carefully. Without me, you have nothing." He shook his head. "Without you, I finally have everything that matters." His voice carried finality. "You're done. From this moment, you have no authority here." Dorothy's breath came fast, her fury barely contained. She gathered her purse with trembling hands, glaring at Jerome as if willing him to disappear. "This isn't over!" she hissed, before storming from the clinic, her heels striking the floor like thunderclaps fading into distance. But even as she left, everyone in the room knew the tide had turned. Her empire was no longer unshakable. It was cracking, splintering under the truth she could no longer control. And Jerome, The man she once cast aside as trash had become the force that unraveled her power. 6 months passed, and the world around Jerome Washington looked entirely different from the gray days of garbage roots and quiet humiliation. Where, once he rose before dawn to climb into a truck, now he walked through the polished glass doors of the Washington Center for Dance and Rehabilitation, a bright facility in the heart of Beverly Hills. The clinic stood tall, not as a monument to wealth, but as a sanctuary for children forgotten by society. Ironically, the funding that built it came from assets seized during federal investigations into Dorothy Whitman's fraudulent empire. The courts had frozen her accounts, redirected ill-gotten millions, and with those resources, something pure was born. On opening day, 50 children from low-income families, many confined to wheelchairs or braces, streamed into the lobby with eyes wide in wonder. For them, therapy had always been a dream too costly. Now it was free, permanent, and filled with hope. Inside the main studio, sunlight poured across mirrored walls and polished floors. Music filled the air, gentle rhythms guiding small hands, steady beats encouraging hesitant steps. In the center of it all was David Whitman, his wheelchair gleaming as brightly as his smile. With Jerome guiding him, he moved in perfect rhythm, his arms sweeping outward like wings, his expression alive with confidence. He was no longer the pale, silent boy caged by his grandmother's rules. He laughed, he celebrated, and he danced in his own way. Every movement told the story of resilience and renewal. Other children watched and joined, and the room became a symphony of motion, laughter, and freedom. Jonathan stood at the doorway, his eyes moist as he witnessed his son thriving. The weight of guilt that had long shadowed him seemed lighter now. He approached Jerome quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. "You didn't just save David, you saved me too. You gave me the courage to stand up, to break free from my mother's grip. I will never forget what you've done." Jerome placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You chose to act when it mattered. That's what changed everything." Between them stretched an unspoken bond forged not by wealth or power, but by shared truth. Meanwhile, the once mighty Dorothy Whitman faced a reckoning. Federal prosecutors built their case meticulously, each piece of evidence confirming what Jerome had uncovered months earlier. Bright Future Foundation, once paraded as a symbol of generosity, was revealed as nothing more than a gilded shell designed to siphon millions into private accounts. Headlines across the country blazed with the scandal. Philanthropy or fraud? Whitman matriarch faces federal charges. Her mansion, once the stage of her dominance, now stood dark and silent, its gates closed as lawyers scrambled and allies vanished. Dorothy appeared in courtrooms stripped of her imperious armor, her once commanding voice reduced to bitter denials. The empire she had built on lies crumbled, and with it, her hold over the people around her. For Jerome, however, victory was never about watching her fall. It was about what rose from the ashes. Each day he walked through the new clinic, he saw children who had been overlooked gaining strength and confidence. Parents wept as they watched sons and daughters take steps or movements they never thought possible. Nurses, therapists, and volunteers filled the halls with purpose, inspired by Jerome's quiet leadership. The man once cast aside as a garbage collector had become the cornerstone of transformation, not just for David, but for dozens of families. One evening, after a long day of therapy sessions, Jerome stood in the empty studio. The sunlight dimmed to a warm glow as he watched the faint reflection of himself in the mirrors. He thought of the journey, how betrayal, humiliation, and injustice had nearly broken him, how a child's simple smile had reignited his calling. He whispered to the empty room. Words meant as much for himself as for anyone who might listen. True revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's rising so high they must look up to see you. The words settled like a quiet oath, carried, on the rhythm of distant music. As the story closed, the narrator's voice carried a final message, inviting those who had listened to remember its meaning. Power built on lies can crumble, but dignity, compassion, and truth can build something everlasting. The journey of Jerome Washington reminded us that even the lowest point can become the foundation for greatness if we refuse to surrender. For more stories like this, subscribe and stay with us, because sometimes the most extraordinary heroes are found in the most unexpected places.